You are listening to the Navigating Adult ADHD podcast, where it's all about education, support, and coaching for adults with ADHD. I'm your host, Zena, a late diagnosed ADHDer, here to help you unpack the challenges, frustrations, and the positive side of living with ADHD. With my no BS approach, I'll help you to better understand your unique ADHD brain and how you can work with it to feel better, increase your self-confidence, improve your relationships, and ultimately achieve your goals. Hello, my beautiful friend. Welcome back to Navigating Adult ADHD. I just want to remind you, if you have not yet hit subscribe, because, hi, we have ADHD, we forget sometimes, which is so me. I just want to remind you, please, if you like the podcast, if you're enjoying it, please hit subscribe, because that does help with bringing on new guests, but also with getting it out to more ADHDers to help more people. So I would really appreciate that, as well as leaving a review if you're enjoying the podcast. There is a super cool new feature I've discovered on Spotify where you can leave a comment under the episode and then I can interact with you. Now, I have yet to figure out how if I need to log in somewhere to do that, but I've seen that you can actually leave a comment under the episodes if you're listening on Spotify, which is cool. So thought I would mention that. So I want to share a story as it relates to what we're talking about today, of course. So yesterday afternoon and this morning, I got to hang out in person with one of my coaching clients who has now become one of my friends. And I live in New Zealand, she lives in Australia, and she's over in New Zealand traveling around the country for a few weeks. And so I had the pleasure of getting to meet her and hang out in person. Now, this is somebody I've not met actually physically in person before, okay, just over a Zoom screen. So in the past, this would have been a source of overthinking and analyzing and like full-on rumination for my brain, right? I would think about things like, what am I going to wear? And like, what are we going to do? And should I take something over? Is she going to be expecting something? Like my brain would just be going wild with all of this, right? And then again, afterwards, like after we've hung out, my brain would have probably come up with, oh my God, why did I say that? Was I oversharing? And why was I so honest? And does she think I'm strange? And on and on. So maybe, my friend, maybe you can relate to that too. Have you ever, found yourself awake at night staring at the ceiling, thinking about, why did I say that to Sandra? Oh my God, she must think I'm a complete idiot. Like, I wish I'd explained myself better. Or maybe on the drive home from lunch with some friends, you find yourself replaying the conversation over and over again, thinking of all the things that you could have said or should have said or wish you'd said differently. Or perhaps you find yourself staring at your computer screen, like paralyzed, unable to get anything done because you're obsessing over something that your coworker just said to you and how she totally misunderstood you and she's taken it out of context. And or maybe when you're waiting for test results, like, how you get a blood test or, some other kind of medical test and you're waiting for results, or it could even be like an exam and you're waiting for results, right? You're basically convinced it's going to be worst case scenario and you're just going to die. I know I can relate to that one. Yeah, my friends, me too, with all of that, me too. In fact, I remember back when I worked in corporate that these were the kinds of things that were happening to me on a daily basis. Looking back now, it actually kind of felt like my brain was hijacked, right? It could be so difficult to concentrate, to get work done, to be productive, or even sleep at times because of the amount of like overthinking and ruminating that was going on. This, my friends, is overthinking and ruminating. And they're two things that those of us with ADHD, right, adults with ADHD, commonly experience. All right. Now, do neurotypical people overthink and ruminate on things? Yes, they do. But ADHD brains are shown to do this more. Okay. So I am going to use the words overthinking and ruminating interchangeably. But when I coach, like when I'm coaching a client, I'll often use like overthinking, ruminating, or even overanalyzing. I'll use that word a little bit too, right? Depending on how they would describe it. So for the purpose of this podcast, I did want to share the difference between ruminating and overthinking. Although it's 100% okay to use those words interchangeably, okay, which I'm going to continue to do. But when we're referring to like thought patterns that leave us feeling overwhelmed or like generally feeling like shit, go with either, okay? So ruminating is when we're obsessively repeating the same thoughts. It'll be like a group of thoughts, right? Over and over and over again, right? And typically those thoughts, those ruminating thoughts are excessive, intrusive, and negative. And they always result in us feeling like crap, right? Feeling bad. Now, overthinking, on the other hand, isn't necessarily going to be redundant, but I find oftentimes amongst our ADHDers that it is, okay? So overthinking is when you like deeply consider things before you take action, like trivial little things, right? However, like I said, neither term is wrong when we're referring to like racing thoughts and like repetitive negative thoughts that us ADHDers experience, okay? So again, I'm going to use both of those words. So when we talk about ruminating, it takes us on a downward spiral, right? It doesn't go upward. There is no positive place that ruminating ends up, right? And sometimes it can feel like it takes over your mind and like you've got no choice in it. But my friends, you do, okay? I promise that you do. And I'm going to share with you in this episode 3 ways that you can tame your wild and overthinking, ruminating brain. All right. But before we get to that, we need to understand why adults with ADHD do this. Why do we ruminate or overthink? Okay. So there are 4 key reasons why we do this. Number 1 is RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria, right? We have an entire episode on that. I think it's number 77, but don't quote me on that. But we have a whole episode, right? Because rejection sensitivity dysphoria is when people with ADHD experience an intense and, really difficult, overwhelming reaction to criticism, failure, or being rejected, whether like really happening or even just the potential, like the perceived idea of that happening, okay? So when we're replaying scenarios or conversations in our head and just like, it could even be that we're thinking something through ahead of time, our brain tries to minimize or avoid any potential rejection, criticism, or failure. So it like thinks these things through from all different angles. Was that me being rejected? Could I be criticized for having said that? Or, how could I potentially fail in this situation? So we're like analyzing and looking at it all, like whether afterwards or even ahead of time, right? Now, our brain is very well meaning in this regard because it's trying to protect us from potential pain. It's trying to protect us by looking out for all of these warning signs, but it's painful nonetheless, okay? So that's RSD. Number 2, which kind of feeds on from that, is emotional dysregulation. Now, this is a big part of ADHD and one of the more challenging symptoms, okay? So effectively, it is the ability to control our emotional reactions and responses, as well as being able to sort of soothe and calm ourselves. Because as ADHDers, we have a tendency to be kind of very all or nothing. So if we, say, have a conversation with somebody, it doesn't go well, that could, give us like an intense emotional reaction, high highs, low lows. So let me give you an example. If we've had a heated conversation with a coworker and it then leaves us replaying that conversation over and over again, we're going to be dysregulated, okay? So perhaps we're feeling anxious or worried or stressed. And we're therefore in a state of fight or flight, okay? So emotional regulation is the ability to calm ourselves down, to regulate the emotions and take them from what might feel like a 9 out of 10 on the intensity scale, right? Take it down to something a little bit more manageable in a place that's, we can better respond or act from, maybe like a 5 out of 10, right? Rather than staying up at that intensity and getting ourselves worked up and into a state and staying in fight or flight all day, right? Being able to regulate is to take ourselves back down, come back down to a 5 or a 6 or, whatever, okay? So that was the second reason why we do this. Number 3 is stimulation, okay? This one's interesting. So we adults with ADHD, right? ADHDers in general, we are always looking for stimulation, right? And just like picking a fight can actually generate stimulation in our brain, as my partner liked to remind me just last night. We were lying in bed and he's like, "You're trying to pick a fight." He's like, "You're trying to get stimulation." And luckily, he kind of jokes about it. And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I am. Fine, whatever." And I rolled over. He was right. But we do that, right? We're ADHD brains. We're always looking for stimulation. Picking a fight is one of the ways that we can generate that stimulation that our brain's looking for. But so can overthinking and ruminating, okay? It can provide a source of stimulation, which produces dopamine, which our brain's always trying to get, although it's a very draining and not pleasant source, right, of stimulation for us, right? So that's our third reason, stimulation. And number 4, all right, my most fascinating favorite one, because I love this research, right? Number 4, I just love to understand the ADHD brain. I would literally talk about this all day. Well, there we go. I do, right? I actually do. It's my job. Isn't that funny? All right. I'm so sidetracked. How ADHD of me. I love it. All right. Number 4. The fourth reason why we, spend so much time ruminating or overthinking, or we might struggle with this, is because ADHD brains actually spend more time in a region of the brain that is called the default mode network. It's often referred to as the DMN, okay, the default mode network. And this is where we generate our creative thinking. So often you will hear ADHD is referred to as being super creative and thinking outside the box. And I think that we generally are. And I love that about us. I think we can have the best conversations with all sorts of tangents and it's super creative and fun. And I love it, right? And this is because our brains spend more time, right? Studies have shown our brains spend more time in this part of the brain, which is called the DMN, the default mode network. Now, in the book ADHD 2.0, which is by Edward Hallowell and John Ratey, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, they explain how our ADHD brains, they spend more time in this DMN, default mode network, right? More time than a non-ADHD brain. Now, that DMN, default mode network, is where we do our creative thinking for better or worse. So, what that means is when our brain is not, engaged in a creative project where we're needing it, sometimes it will go and find one, right? If our brain is not solving a creative problem, like we're brainstorming ideas for our business or, having to figure something out at work, when we don't have that creative outlet, sometimes our brain will just go looking for a problem to find and solve or to obsess over, okay? And perhaps you might notice that this happens later in the day or in the evenings, right? When your brain's got less to focus on. And also you've probably got a little bit less in terms of dopamine in the tank, right? So again, our brain goes looking for a creative and sometimes unhelpful problem to solve or obsess over or think about, okay? So again, I'll quote Ned Hallowell, the author of ADHD 2.0. I love his work. He says it's a habit, right? Overthinking and ruminating is a habit just like smoking, right? And you can quit smoking. So Ned also refers to it as the demon of the mind because it is creating these imaginary negative scenarios in our heads, right? And it is kind of like the devil of our own creation. You cannot out-argue it, right? We've created it. It knows all of our strategies. We can't argue our own, brain when it's in that ruminating and overthinking. We can't outdo it when we're in the same head with it, right? When you look at it like that, it makes a bit of sense, okay? Now, the good news, my friends, is that without your attention, the demon of the mind can't survive, okay? So if you don't feed it attention, it will starve. So let's talk about how we can do this. Now, this is something that I personally have gotten pretty good at doing, and yet I can still get sucked in, right? I can at times find myself overthinking or ruminating. It's kind of like tentacles that grab you and just pull you in. And when I do, these are the 3 things that I use to tame my wild overthinking or ruminating brain. Starting with number 1, which is I get out of my head, okay? I want you to imagine that you are trying to solve a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle in the dark, right? Like, how difficult does that sound? If you're trying to put together a 1,000-piece giant jigsaw puzzle in the dark, yeah, not so good, right? That's what we're doing when we keep thinking about something in our head over and over and over again. We're trying to solve our own jigsaw in the dark. So, my friend, grab a piece of paper and a pen and write about what is bothering you. Tip it all out of your head. Right until you've got nothing left in there. It's all out. Okay? Now, alternatively, there are some people who find it better to do what is called DBT, dialect behavioral therapy. Effectively, it's just like talk therapy, right? Just saying it out loud, speaking it out loud. Okay? I'm a big fan of just writing it because it requires you to slow down, but whatever works for you. Either way, just get it out of your head. Okay? This is going to help you by slowing you, right? Slowing down your racing brain, slowing down your racing body. It's like turning the light on in that dark room with your 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, right? Now you can make decisions. Now you can look at things more clearly and in a new light. It was, again, Ned Hallowell, who I once heard say, never worry alone. Okay, so you either speak it out loud to a safe and supportive person, or you write it all down, right? Get it out of the dark and into the light, right? That's number 1, get it out of your head. Number 2 is to get out of your head and into your body, right? So when we're ruminating, right, we know we go on a downward spiral. It ends badly, right? So rather than feeding it, do something to break the habit, to get out of the spiral. So for example, if you are at work and you take a 10-minute break to just walk around the block outside, right? Get out of the environment, get outside, walk around the block. You are doing a couple of very positive things for your brain and your body. You are participating in an activity that can help you to regulate your emotions, and you're also engaging the TPN, that stands for Task Positive Network, a different area of the brain. And when you engage that TPN, you shut down the DMN, that default mode network, which is responsible for our creativity, okay? So when you do that, you move out of using your creative brain, right, by engaging in a task, specifically one that's going to help you get out of your head and into your body. So other ways that you could do this include having a cold shower, okay? If you're at home, you could just have like a 1-minute cold shower, right? Or it could be, you simply just fill up a bowl with like cold water, or you could throw some ice cubes in there and just stick your face in a bowl of cold water, right? It could also be that you just dance it out to a song that you like. Or you just jump up and down on the spot, do some jumping jacks, move your body around. I recently got a rebounder. I don't know if I've told you guys, I'm fucking obsessed with it. And I got it so that in between sessions, I could just like jump up and down, dance it out to a song again, help move my body, get out of my head, into my body. There's so many benefits, right? Build up my dopamine, it's building serotonin, all sorts of different things. It's fantastic. Plus, there is a study out of NASA, and this is wild to me, right? A study from NASA that said 10 minutes on the rebounder is better than 33 minutes of running. Crazy. Anyway, it is just so fun. If you follow me over on like Instagram, you will see the fun. So that's Navigating Adult ADHD on Instagram if you want to like see my wild trampoline adventures, right? But it's another way that I can get out of my head and into my body, right? So if I were to play a song, just one song, right? Say it's 3 minutes or whatever, jump up and down on that trampoline, I am helping to break that cycle of ruminating. I'm helping to get out of my head, to get into my body, to regulate my emotions, right? To do so many positive things. Again, right? Shut down the default mode network, right? My creative brain that's trying to problem solve this horrible ruminating situation. And I'm engaging that task positive network to, switch between different areas of my brain, right? Such a cool thing to do. I'm such a fan of the rebounder. So if you remember, right, our ADHD brains are always looking for stimulation, right? And engaging in any of the activities, whether it's the rebounder, right, or a cold shower, or just going for a walk, or you could just even go for a run, whatever it is for you, right? What we're doing is we're providing stimulation, right? When we're engaging in these activities, we give our brain the stimulation that it wants and needs. Now, I recommend that you have activities in mind, that you decide ahead of time what are maybe like 3 to 5 things that you could do, right? Whether you're at home or at work or somewhere else. What are some things that you could do in that moment, right? Something that will be more stimulating than the ruminating you are doing. And it doesn't have to take long, right? It can literally be a few minutes. So that's number 2, is to get out of your head and into your body, into moving your body around. Okay. Number 3 is to ask and answer a question. Now, I prefer that you write this down, or again, you can do it out loud. Either you speak it out loud or you say it out loud to your safe person, right? And the question is, what if it all works out? Right? Because your brain is like going worst case and like going through all of these terrible scenarios and situations, what have you. What if it all works out? Right? You're flipping it. Then what? Right? Generally, we don't dwell on the positive. Isn't that interesting? But we could, right? What if it all works out? Now you've got to answer that. What would that look like? What would that feel like? How would that be different? What would I do? Spend some time there. Now, if you find yourself being sucked back into the ruminating thoughts by the tentacles, right, drawn back in, just come back to one of these 3 things or a combination of them, right? Try a different one. And again, if you find yourself sort of sucked back in, take the stimulation up a notch. What's something a little more stimulating I can do? One of my clients the other day shared with me that she got herself and her daughter and they just went and bounced on the tramp for a few minutes. Got a trampoline in her backyard and they just went and bounced on it. I was like, fantastic, right? And again, like we can get creative with this if we engage, right? Our DMN, our default mode network, we can get creative and like, well, what could I do? Right? What are some different ways that I could do this to generate that stimulation, to switch back to that other side of my brain, to get out of my head into my body? Like, what could that look like? All right. My friend, I promise you can learn how to regulate and tame the overthinking and ruminating part of your brain. Heck, if I can do it, I guarantee that you can. Trust me. I'm sure if you've been listening to this for a while, you have heard some of my wild stories, right? Just keep coming back to these 3 things that I have shared with you, okay? Number 1, get it out of your head, right? I recommend either writing it down or talking it out loud to a safe person. But remember, it's like we're trying to solve a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle in the dark when we keep it in our head, going over and over and over it. No, get it out of your head. Number 2 is to get out of your head and into your body, right? So that is engaging in another activity. Now, that is going to support with regulating our emotions, okay? So taking us maybe from like a 9 out of 10 down to maybe like a 6 out of 10 or a 5 out of 10. And also we're going to switch between those 2 different areas of the brain. So we're going to turn off that DMN, the default mode network that's, creatively trying to solve an unhelpful problem, and move it back to the task positive network, okay? And the third one is to ask and answer that question, right? What if it all works out? Spend some time in it. Your brain's going to be reluctant. That's okay. What if it all works out? What would that look like? How would that feel? What would you do? What would other people do? Spend some time hanging out there. All right, my friend, you have got this. Huge love. Take care, and I will speak to you next week. If you are loving what you're learning here on the podcast, but you still feel like your ADHD is holding you back, I can help. Using evidence-based coaching tools and my own experiences, I'll help you to manage your emotions and feel better, to increase your productivity, grow your self-confidence, and create the life that you were meant for. Visit zenajones.com/thrive and schedule an ADHD support session to get started.